The champagne glass slipped from my hand, shattering across the hardwood floor of our Pearl District loft. Brandon looked up from his laptop, concern flashing across his handsome face, but I barely registered his movement. My eyes were locked on my phone screen, on the photograph staring back at me. Same blue eyes. Same dimpled smile. Same man I was supposed to marry in 3 weeks. Different name entirely. My laugh came out strangled, hysterical, completely wrong for the moment. Brandon stood up, confusion replacing concern, and I watched his expression shift through emotions I'd learned to read over 2 years together. Except now, seeing that micro-expression of calculation before the warmth flooded back into his features, I realized I'd never really known how to read him at all. I'd just been reading the character he'd created for me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The search results glowed accusingly on my screen. 3 different identities. 7 different cities. And at the bottom of the page, a news article from San Diego with a headline that made my blood turn to ice. I raised my eyes to meet his, and for the first time since we'd met at that marketing conference in Seattle, I saw genuine fear flicker across Brandon Colton's face. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been having the kind of morning that romance novels are written about. Autumn sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our loft, catching the diamond on my left hand as I reached for my coffee. Brandon had already left for an early meeting at Colton & Associates, the investment consulting firm he'd built from the ground up, or so I'd been told. The story of his entrepreneurial journey was one I could recite by heart. Struggling college dropout who taught himself finance, worked his way up from nothing, and created a boutique firm that catered to Portland's growing tech wealth. It was inspiring. It was romantic. It was, I would soon discover, completely fabricated. I worked from home that Wednesday, preparing a presentation for Velocity Marketing Group's biggest client. At 29, I'd fought hard to become the youngest marketing director in the company's history, and I was fiercely protective of my reputation. My laptop sat open on the dining table, surrounded by color swatches and campaign mock-ups, but my mind kept drifting to the wedding binder on the kitchen counter. 3 weeks. Just 21 days until I became Natalie Colton. The thought sent a flutter through my chest, that giddy anticipation I'd been riding for the past 8 months since Brandon proposed on a sunset hike through Forest Park. He'd been so nervous, dropping the ring box twice before finally getting down on one knee, his rehearsed speech dissolving into stammered declarations of love. That vulnerability had made me love him even more. The polished investment consultant facade falling away to reveal the genuine man beneath. Or what I'd thought was the genuine man beneath. My phone buzzed with a text from Grace Montgomery, my best friend since college. The message was simple but insistent. Did you see the email from Vanessa about the final venue walkthrough? She wants to confirm Friday. I pulled up my email, scanning through the thread with our wedding planner. Vanessa Torres had been a godsend, handling all the details I was too busy to manage. The Sentinel Hotel was her domain, and she'd transformed their rooftop terrace into something magical for our outdoor ceremony. As I scrolled through her latest update, my eyes caught on a document attachment I didn't remember seeing before. Final vendor list with contact information. Opening it revealed pages of names, numbers, and business details. Florists, photographers, the DJ, catering staff. Standard wedding logistics. But as I skimmed the list, one entry made me pause. Under the category of videographer, there was a note in Vanessa's handwriting. Client requested no video recording. Confirmed with groom 3 times. Photography only. That was odd. I didn't remember requesting that. In fact, I'd specifically told Vanessa I wanted video because my parents, now retired and traveling through Europe, wouldn't be able to attend. I'd wanted them to experience the ceremony as close to real time as possible. I made a mental note to clarify with Brandon that evening. My presentation demanded attention, and I lost myself in color theory and brand positioning for the next several hours. It wasn't until early afternoon, when I stood to stretch and refill my coffee, that I noticed Brandon's iPad sitting on the end table by the couch. He must have forgotten it in his rush that morning. The screen was dark, but as I walked past, it lit up with a notification. Calendar reminder for Derek Thompson. Conference call in 30 minutes. Derek Thompson. I stared at the name, a strange unease prickling at the back of my neck. Brandon had never mentioned anyone named Derek Thompson. In 2 years together, I'd learned most of his business contacts, at least the important ones. Tyler Chen, his business partner. Nicole Bradford, their administrative manager. The various clients whose names came up over dinner conversations. But Derek Thompson was new. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Brandon had dozens of professional connections I didn't know about. His business was his domain, and I respected those boundaries just as he respected my work privacy. But something about that notification nagged at me. Maybe it was the wedding stress making me paranoid. Maybe it was the odd note about the videographer. Maybe it was just pre-wedding jitters manifesting as suspicion. I picked up my phone, intending to text Brandon about the iPad, when an impulse seized me. Before I could second-guess it, I opened my browser and typed into the search bar. Derek Thompson Investment Consultant Portland. The results were generic. Dozens of LinkedIn profiles, business listings, professional directories. Nothing that immediately connected to Brandon or his firm. I refined the search, adding Seattle to see if perhaps this was a contact from the conference where we'd met. Still nothing relevant. Then, operating on pure instinct I couldn't explain, I typed something different into the search bar. Brandon Colton Investment Consultant. What appeared on my screen should have been predictable. His company website. His LinkedIn profile. Maybe some business articles or press releases. That's what happens when you search for a legitimate professional with an established presence. Instead, my search returned almost nothing. The Colton & Associates website existed, sleek and professional. But there were no articles, no press mentions, no professional history beyond a bare-bones LinkedIn profile created just 3 years ago. For someone who claimed to have built a successful firm over a decade, the digital footprint was suspiciously sparse. My coffee forgotten, I dug deeper. I searched for news articles about Colton & Associates. Nothing. I looked for business registrations and found the company incorporated in Oregon only 4 years ago, not the 10 Brandon had mentioned. I searched for Brandon's name combined with his claimed alma mater, Portland State University. No results. No alumni listings, no graduation records available in public databases. The unease that had been a subtle prickle now felt like ice spreading through my veins. There were explanations for this, I told myself. Privacy settings. Common names leading to confusion. Digital records that hadn't been properly indexed. But deep in my gut, that primal instinct that evolution gave us to sense predators, something screamed danger. I grabbed Brandon's iPad again, my hands trembling slightly. It was locked, but I knew his passcode. We'd shared device passwords early in our relationship, a gesture of trust and transparency. I typed in the 6 digits, and the home screen appeared. My finger hovered over his email app before I pulled back. Reading his email felt like a violation, a line I wasn't ready to cross based solely on an absence of search results and a strange calendar entry. Instead, I opened his photos. If there was an innocent explanation, I'd find evidence of the life he described. Pictures from his Portland State days. Photos from the early years of building his business. Images with friends and family that matched the stories he'd told. The photo library contained exactly 473 images. I knew because the number displayed at the bottom of the screen. 473 photos spanning our entire relationship and nothing before. The earliest image was dated 2 years and 3 months ago, taken the week before we'd met. It showed Brandon at what appeared to be a hotel room, professionally dressed, smiling at the camera. No context. No location tag. Just a man who appeared to have materialized into existence shortly before entering my life. I scrolled frantically through the collection. Every photo was from our time together or from his supposed business activities over the past 2 years. There were no childhood pictures. No college memories. No images with his parents, who he claimed had died in a car accident when he was 25. No friends from before me. His digital life began exactly when mine intersected with it. My presentation forgotten, I returned to my laptop and began searching with new focus. I tried variations of his name. Brandon Colton plus various cities he'd mentioned visiting. Brandon Colton with the name of his supposed childhood hometown in Ohio. I searched for Colton and Associates in business directories, looking for any mention that predated 4 years ago. Then I thought about the calendar notification. Derek Thompson. What if that wasn't a client or colleague? What if it was something else entirely? I typed a new search. Derek Thompson's Seattle investment. The results loaded, and my breath caught. Third entry down was a news article from the Seattle Times, dated 5 years ago. The headline read Local Investment Advisor Under Investigation for Fraud. I clicked it with shaking hands. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The article detailed allegations against Derek Thompson, a Seattle-based investment consultant who had allegedly defrauded multiple clients of over $2 million through elaborate schemes involving fake portfolios and falsified returns. Several victims had come forward claiming Thompson had disappeared before authorities could arrest him. The article included a photograph. My vision tunneled. The man in the photo had darker hair, styled differently. He wore glasses that Brandon never did. His face was slightly fuller, suggesting the photo was several years old. But the bone structure was identical. The set of the eyes. The specific curve of his smile. I was looking at Brandon Colton, only he wasn't Brandon Colton at all. I pulled up the photo on my phone and held it next to a recent picture of Brandon on my laptop screen. Even accounting for the styling differences and the passage of time, the match was undeniable. Same person. Different identity. My hands trembled as I searched for more information about Derek Thompson. I found additional articles, each one adding another layer to my growing horror. Thompson had targeted professional women, often meeting them at conferences or networking events. He'd build relationships, gain trust, and eventually convince them to invest in opportunities that didn't exist. But the financial fraud was only part of his pattern. In 2 cases mentioned in the articles, he became romantically involved with his victims, proposing marriage before disappearing with their money and leaving behind financial devastation. One article mentioned that Thompson was believed to have fled to California. I searched Derek Thompson's San Diego, remembering Brandon had mentioned spending time there years ago, claiming he'd briefly worked for a firm in their financial district. The results made my stomach drop. Another news article, this one from the San Diego Union Tribune, dated 3 years ago. Former investment advisor suspected in identity fraud case. The article was sparse on details, citing an ongoing investigation, but it confirmed that Derek Thompson was wanted in connection with multiple fraud cases across Washington and California. Authorities believed he was operating under assumed identities. There was no photo in this article, but it included a detail that struck me like physical blow. Thompson was known to target women in marketing and communications fields, industries where his victims would be well-connected but often too busy to conduct thorough background checks on romantic partners. I thought about how we'd met. A digital marketing conference in Seattle. I'd been there representing Velocity Marketing Group, networking at an evening reception. Brandon, or whoever he really was, had approached me at the hotel bar. He'd been charming, attentive, asking intelligent questions about my work. When he'd mentioned he was in town for meetings with potential Seattle clients for his Portland firm, it had seemed like fate that we were both based in the same city. Now I saw it for what it was. Calculated. Strategic. I hadn't fallen in love by chance. I'd been selected. My phone rang, Brandon's name lighting up the screen. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the answer button. Every instinct screamed at me to confront him, to demand the truth. But a cooler part of my mind, the strategic thinker that had made me successful in my career, intervened. If I confronted him now, before I had more information, he would run. Just like he'd run from Seattle. Just like he'd run from San Diego. I let the call go to voicemail and listened as his message played. His voice warm and familiar, saying he'd forgotten his iPad and asking if I'd seen it. Completely normal. Completely innocuous. The voice of a man I thought I knew. I couldn't stay in the loft. The walls felt like they were closing in, every piece of furniture suddenly foreign and threatening. I grabbed my laptop, my phone, and Brandon's iPad, shoving them into my messenger bag. I scrawled a quick note saying I'd gone to work on my presentation at a coffee shop downtown, needing a change of scenery. Then I left, double-locking the door behind me. Bridgeport Cafe was busy with the afternoon crowd, which suited my purposes perfectly. I claimed a corner table in the back, ordered coffee I wouldn't drink, and opened my laptop to continue my research. Over the next 3 hours, I constructed a timeline that made my chest tighten with each new discovery. 5 years ago, Derek Thompson operated in Seattle. 3 years ago, articles suggested he'd moved to San Diego. 2 years and 3 months ago, Brandon Colton's digital presence began in Portland. The gaps aligned too perfectly to be coincidental. I searched for victims, finding several names mentioned in various articles. Most were identified only by first names or initials, but I managed to track down 2 women who had spoken publicly about their experiences. One had a blog documenting her recovery from what she called financial and emotional abuse. Another had posted in online forums warning others about investment fraud. I composed careful messages to both, introducing myself as a journalist researching patterns in investment fraud. It was a lie, but I needed information they might not share if they knew I was potentially his next target. I sent the messages and waited, knowing I might not hear back for hours or even days. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from Brandon. Asking where I was. Saying he missed me. Wondering if I wanted to grab dinner at our favorite restaurant on the waterfront. Each message was a small knife twisting in my gut. This man, whoever he was, had studied me thoroughly enough to know exactly how to keep me engaged, trusting, and crucially, unquestioning. I thought about the past 2 years with new eyes, looking for the cracks in his constructed identity. The way he'd always been vague about his childhood, changing small details each time he told a story. How he never wanted to visit his supposed hometown in Ohio, claiming the memories were too painful after his parents' death. The fact that I'd never met any of his friends from before we were together. He'd explained it all so reasonably. A private person. A painful past. A focus on building a future rather than dwelling in history. Now I saw the truth. He had no past because Brandon Colton had never existed before he needed to become someone, and my laptop pinged with a response to one of my messages. The woman with the blog, identifying herself only as Catherine, had written back faster than I expected. Her message was brief but pointed. If you're researching Derek Thompson, you need to be careful. He's dangerous in ways that go beyond money. Can we talk by phone? I stepped outside the cafe, finding a quiet spot along the sidewalk where the afternoon traffic noise provided cover. Catherine answered on the first ring, her voice cautious but steady. She listened as I explained my situation, though I dropped the journalist pretense immediately. Something in her initial warning made me trust that honesty would serve me better than deception. There was a long silence after I finished speaking. Then Catherine's voice came through, tight with emotion. You're 3 weeks away from marrying him? The wedding is actually planned? Yes. The Sentinel Hotel. October 15th. Everything is arranged. She let out a breath that sounded like relief and dread mixed together. Then you're further along than I ever got. He proposed to me too, but he disappeared 2 weeks before the wedding date. Took $80,000 from my investment accounts and another $40,000 I'd saved for the wedding itself. My credit was destroyed. It took me 3 years to rebuild my life. I leaned against the brick wall of the cafe, my legs suddenly unsteady. Did you ever find out his real name? No. I knew him as Marcus Webb, which is probably as fake as whatever name he's given you. The Seattle police said he's used at least 6 different identities that they know of. Each time, he builds an entire backstory. Business. Friends who turn out to be accomplices or people paid to play roles. Even family members who don't exist. How did you figure it out? Catherine's laugh was bitter. I didn't. He left, and then I started getting calls from creditors about accounts opened in my name. That's when I discovered he'd been systematically stealing my identity while planning to marry me. The wedding wasn't the end game. It was just another tool for access. Once we were married, he'd have legal claim to everything. Full control over my finances, my property, my entire life. The implications hit me like cold water. I thought about the paperwork Brandon had asked me to sign over the past months. Combining our car insurance to save money. Adding him as an authorized user on one of my credit cards for emergencies. Setting up a joint savings account for wedding expenses. Each request had seemed reasonable, practical even. Now I saw them as careful steps in a larger plan. What made him finally leave? I asked. Why didn't he go through with the wedding? Catherine hesitated. I think someone recognized him. About 2 weeks before the wedding, he came home agitated. Said he needed to travel for an unexpected business emergency. He kissed me goodbye, promised he'd be back in 3 days, and I never saw him again. Later, I found out another woman had posted his photo on a fraud awareness forum. Someone must have shown it to him or he found it somehow. That's his pattern. The moment he thinks he's been identified, he vanishes. My mind raced through the implications. If Brandon had successfully operated under multiple identities for years, he had a system. Resources. Probably connections that helped him create new personas. This wasn't amateur hour. This was sophisticated, practiced deception. Catherine, did the police ever make progress on the case? She sighed. They tried. But he's good at covering his tracks. The business he claimed to own didn't really exist beyond a website and a registered business name. The office address was a mail forwarding service. His references were all fake. By the time they started investigating, he'd already established himself somewhere else under a new name. The detective told me these kinds of criminals are incredibly difficult to catch because they're constantly moving, constantly reinventing. We talked for another 20 minutes. Catherine sharing details about the manipulation tactics he'd used. How he'd isolated her from friends who expressed concerns. The way he'd rushed the relationship, creating intensity that felt like destiny rather than calculation. His skill at reading people and becoming exactly what they needed. Every detail she described matched my experience with eerie precision. After we ended the call, I sat in my car in the cafe parking lot, trying to organize my thoughts into something resembling a plan. Confronting Brandon directly would accomplish nothing except alerting him that I knew. Going to the police with online articles and a theory based on physical resemblance might not be enough to stop him, especially if he'd perfected the art of disappearing. I needed more concrete evidence. Documentation that definitively proved Brandon Colton and Derek Thompson were the same person. Financial records showing fraudulent activity. Something substantial enough that authorities would have to act immediately. My phone buzzed again. Grace this time, not Brandon. Her message was cheerful, asking about final dress fittings and whether I'd confirmed the flower delivery schedule. Normal wedding concerns from someone who had no idea that the wedding she'd been helping me plan was built on a foundation of lies. I almost called her. Grace had been my closest friend since we'd met during freshman orientation at the University of Oregon. She knew me better than almost anyone. But something stopped me. If I told her now, she'd react. She'd want to confront Brandon, call the police, do something immediate and protective. I needed time to gather evidence without anyone, including well-meaning friends, accidentally tipping him off. Instead, I texted back with enthusiasm I didn't feel, confirming that everything was on track. Then I drove home, rehearsing my performance for the evening ahead. I had to be normal. Excited about the wedding. Loving and trusting. I had to be the woman Brandon expected, the woman he'd carefully cultivated over 2 years. The loft was empty when I returned. I placed Brandon's iPad exactly where he'd left it, my note crumpled in my pocket as evidence I'd need to dispose of. Then I opened my laptop and began constructing a different kind of presentation than the one I was supposed to be working on. I created a secure folder, password protected and backed up to an encrypted cloud service Brandon didn't know about. Inside, I began organizing everything I'd found. Screenshots of articles. Links to news reports. Photos comparing Brandon to Derek Thompson. Timeline documentation. Catherine's contact information. I worked methodically, the way I approached any major campaign at work, building a comprehensive case file. Brandon came home around 7, his arrival announced by the familiar sound of his key in the lock. I was in the kitchen, having forced myself to start preparing dinner as if this were any other evening. When he walked in, bouquet of flowers in hand and that warm smile on his face, I had to physically suppress the urge to recoil. "There's my beautiful bride-to-be." He crossed the room and kissed me, his lips familiar against mine. Now tasting like betrayal. Sorry I was unreachable most of the afternoon. Back-to-back meetings with a potential new client. Big portfolio, very demanding. It's fine. I accepted the flowers, moving to find a vase while creating distance between us. How did it go? He launched into a detailed story about this fictional client, describing investment strategies and portfolio requirements with impressive fluency. I'd always been impressed by his financial knowledge, the ease with which he discussed complex investment concepts. Now I wondered if that expertise was real or simply another well-rehearsed performance. Over dinner, Brandon talked enthusiastically about the wedding. He'd been reviewing the final schedule with Vanessa, he said, making sure every detail was perfect. He wanted our day to be flawless, memorable, everything I'd dreamed of. Each word felt like acid, eating away at what remained of my trust. I mentioned the videographer situation casually, saying I'd noticed Vanessa's note about photo-only coverage. Brandon's expression didn't change, his response smooth and immediate. He'd been meaning to talk to me about that, he said. Video felt too invasive, too performative. He wanted us to be present in the moment rather than conscious of cameras. Photographs could capture the highlights, but video made everything feel staged. It was a reasonable explanation. Thoughtful even. Exactly the kind of consideration that had made me fall in love with him. Except now I heard the real reason beneath the romantic justification. Video was too risky. Moving images captured microexpressions, vocal patterns, mannerisms that photographs could hide. Video could be analyzed, compared, potentially identified by someone from his past. That makes sense. I smiled at him across the table. You're right. Let's keep it intimate. His relief was subtle but visible. A slight relaxation in his shoulders, a genuine warmth entering his eyes. I'd given him the response he needed, confirmed that I remained the trusting partner he'd cultivated. The perfect mark. We spent the evening like any other, watching a movie on the couch with Brandon's arm around my shoulders. He fell asleep before the credits rolled, his breathing deep and even. I stayed awake, my mind spinning through scenarios and possibilities. The man sleeping beside me was a stranger. A criminal. Potentially dangerous in ways I was only beginning to understand. Around midnight, I carefully extracted myself from his embrace and retreated to the bathroom. I sat on the edge of the tub, phone in hand, composing a message to Detective Rachel Simmons. I'd found her name in one of the Seattle articles about Derek Thompson. She'd been quoted as the lead investigator on his fraud case. My message was direct. I explained who I was, where I lived, and my suspicion that the man I was engaged to marry was actually Derek Thompson. I included the comparison photos and links to the articles I'd found. I emphasized the upcoming wedding date and my fear that he would disappear if he suspected I knew the truth. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then returned to bed. Brandon hadn't stirred. I lay beside him in the darkness, listening to him breathe, wondering how many other women had done the same thing. How many had lain awake next to this man, believing they knew him, trusting him with their futures. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by racing thoughts and quiet panic. When morning light finally filtered through the windows, I woke to find Brandon already up, showered, and preparing for another day at his fake office. He kissed my forehead, told me he loved me, and left. I waited exactly 10 minutes to make sure he wasn't coming back. Then I grabbed his iPad again. This time, I went deeper. I checked his email, finding mostly legitimate-looking business correspondence that probably meant nothing. But in his deleted folder, I found something interesting. An email from someone named Jonathan Pierce, sent 3 months ago. The subject line read simply status update. The message was brief. New documentation ready for pickup. Portland location working well. Suggest maintaining current identity minimum 18 months post-acquisition before transition. Acquisition. The word sent chills through me. That's what I was. Not a fiancé. Not a partner. An acquisition. A target whose resources would be systematically harvested before he moved on to his next identity, his next victim. I forwarded the email to my secure account and deleted the evidence of accessing it. Then I searched through his calendar more carefully, looking for patterns. Most entries were generic. Client meeting. Conference call. Lunch appointment. But every few weeks, there was a blocked-out period marked only with the letter J. The most recent had occurred 2 days ago. The next was scheduled for a week from now. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered to find Detective Simmons on the other end, her voice professional but urgent. Miss Harper, I received your message. I need you to listen very carefully. If the man you're engaged to is Derek Thompson, you may be in serious danger. Can you meet me today? Detective Simmons chose a diner on the outskirts of Portland, far enough from the Pearl District that I wouldn't accidentally run into anyone from my social circle. I arrived 20 minutes early, ordering coffee I couldn't drink while my leg bounced nervously under the table. When she walked in, I recognized her immediately from the photo accompanying her quotes in the news articles. Mid-40s, dark hair pulled back efficiently, and eyes that assessed everything with the practiced observation of someone who'd seen too much human deception. She slid into the booth across from me without preamble, declining the waitress's offer of coffee. Ms. Harper, I've been tracking Derek Thompson for 4 years. Show me everything you have. I pulled out my laptop and walked her through my findings. The comparison photos, the timeline of his digital presence appearing from nowhere, the correlation between Derek Thompson's disappearance from San Diego and Brandon Colton's emergence in Portland. She listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly grave. When I finished, she pulled out her own tablet. What I'm about to show you is part of an active investigation, so this conversation stays completely confidential. Understood? I nodded, my throat tight. She opened a file containing surveillance photos and documents. Derek Thompson, real name unknown, has been operating sophisticated identity fraud and romance scams for at least 8 years, probably longer. We've connected him to at least 12 victims across 5 states. Total financial damages exceed $4 million. But the money isn't what makes him particularly dangerous. She swiped to another photo, this one showing a woman I didn't recognize. This is Christine Williams. She was engaged to someone she knew as Michael Patterson in San Francisco 6 years ago. 2 weeks before their wedding, she discovered some financial irregularities and confronted him. He disappeared, but not before draining her accounts and maxing out every credit card. She spent 3 years paying off debt for purchases she never made. That's awful, but Catherine told me something similar happened to her. What makes this different? Detective Simmons swiped again, showing what looked like medical records. Christine Williams developed severe anxiety and PTSD. But beyond the emotional trauma, she started receiving threatening messages a year after he disappeared. Photos of her daily routine. Details about her life that showed someone was still watching her. The harassment continued for 18 months until she filed for a restraining order against a person she couldn't name or locate. My stomach dropped. You think he came back? We know he has people working with him. That email you found mentioning Jonathan Pierce matches a name that's appeared in connection with 2 other victims. We believe Thompson has a network that helps him establish new identities and sometimes continues monitoring previous victims, possibly to ensure they don't pursue legal action too aggressively. I thought about the blocked calendar entries marked with J. Is Pierce in Portland? We don't know. He uses multiple aliases too. Detective Simmons leaned forward, her gaze intense. Natalie, I need you to understand something. The wedding isn't just about getting access to your finances. Marriage gives him legal rights that make it much harder for you to protect yourself afterward. Community property laws, spousal privileges, joint liability for debts. Once you're married, he can do significantly more damage before disappearing. Then why does he run before the wedding sometimes? Catherine said he left her 2 weeks before their ceremony. The detective pulled up another file. In cases where he's bolted before the wedding, we believe he'd already extracted most of what he wanted or sensed the risk of exposure was too high. But in 3 cases, he actually went through with the marriage. Those victims suffered the worst financial devastation because he had months of legal access to everything. One woman lost her house, her retirement accounts, and ended up filing for bankruptcy. I felt the room tilt slightly. 3 weeks. He needs 3 more weeks, and then I'm legally bound to someone who doesn't even exist. Which is why we need to move carefully. Detective Simmons pulled out a notepad. If we spook him now, he'll disappear, and we'll never catch him. He's too practiced at vanishing. We need to catch him in the act of committing a crime we can prove, with evidence solid enough that he can't talk his way out. What kind of evidence? Financial fraud we can document in real time. Identity theft with clear proof. Ideally, we'd catch him accessing accounts illegally or meeting with his accomplices to coordinate the next phase. She tapped her pen against the notepad. You mentioned an engagement party planned for this weekend? Yes. At a venue on the Willamette River waterfront. About 80 guests. Mostly his business associates and my friends and family. That's perfect. Public setting, lots of witnesses, and he'll be focused on maintaining his cover. That's when people get sloppy. She looked at me directly. I know what I'm about to ask is difficult, but I need you to go through with the party. Act normally. Let him think you suspect nothing. The thought of standing beside him, smiling for photos, accepting congratulations from friends who had no idea they were celebrating a lie, made me want to scream. But I understood the logic. We needed him confident, comfortable, convinced his plan was proceeding smoothly. I can do that. My voice came out steadier than I felt. What happens at the party? We'll have undercover officers there. I'll be there myself as a guest. We'll be watching his interactions, particularly anyone he meets with who might be part of his network. I also need you to do something that's going to feel wrong. What? I need you to tell him you're adding him to your bank accounts. Make it seem like a practical step for after the wedding. Watch how he reacts, what questions he asks. We need to document that he's actively pursuing access to your finances. Won't that actually give him access? Not if we set it up correctly. We'll work with your bank to create what looks like account access but is actually monitored and restricted. Anything he tries to do will be tracked and documented. It'll be enough to prove intent. We spent the next 2 hours going over details. She gave me a secure phone number that bypassed regular channels. Explained how to document conversations without being obvious. Discussed what to look for in his behavior that might indicate he was planning his exit strategy. By the time I left the diner, I felt like I'd been drafted into an undercover operation I had no training for. The weekend engagement party loomed 3 days away. I drove back to the loft, rehearsing the performance I'd need to deliver. Brandon was already home when I arrived, earlier than usual. He'd picked up Thai food from our favorite restaurant, the containers spread across the kitchen counter. Surprise. He smiled at me, that warm expression I'd once found so endearing. I figured we deserved a quiet night in before the party chaos. We ate while he talked about venue preparations and last-minute details with Vanessa. He was excited, genuinely animated in a way that would have touched me a week ago. Now I listened for false notes, studied his expressions for cracks in the facade. But he was seamless, perfectly calibrated to be exactly what I expected. After dinner, I broached the topic Detective Simmons had suggested. I've been thinking about our finances. Once we're married, it makes sense to consolidate some things. I was wondering if we should add you to my primary checking account now so you can help manage wedding expenses. Brandon's reaction was carefully neutral, but I caught the microscopic pause before he responded. That's thoughtful, but there's no rush. We can handle that after the honeymoon. It would just be easier now. I pressed gently, watching his face. My account has better interest rates, and you're already handling so many vendor payments. This way you wouldn't have to wait for reimbursement. If you're sure. He smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I appreciate you trusting me with this. The words felt like a blade sliding between my ribs. Trust. The foundation he'd spent 2 years building, carefully constructed so he could exploit it exactly this way. I smiled back, squeezed his hand, and hated every second of it. The next morning, I went to my bank with Detective Simmons meeting me there discreetly. The bank manager, already briefed on the situation, helped establish what looked like joint account access but was actually a monitored decoy. Any attempt to transfer funds would appear to process but actually be held and documented. Any financial activity would be tracked and recorded. Brandon filled out the paperwork that evening, signing forms with his careful, practiced signature. He asked appropriate questions about access limits and transfer capabilities, nothing that would seem suspicious to anyone who didn't know what to listen for. But I heard the underlying assessment, the mental calculations about what he'd be able to do once this access went live. The engagement party arrived with unseasonably warm October weather. The riverside venue sparkled with lights strung between trees, the Willamette flowing past as a picturesque backdrop. Vanessa had outdone herself with the decorations, creating an atmosphere of romantic elegance. Guests began arriving at sunset, and I stood beside Brandon greeting everyone with smiles that hurt my face. Grace arrived early, pulling me into a tight hug. You look beautiful. A little tired, but beautiful. Are you feeling okay? Just wedding stress. The lie came easily now, smooth and practiced. So much to coordinate. She studied my face with the concern of someone who'd known me too long to be easily fooled. If you need anything, I mean anything, you know I'm here. I know. I hugged her again, letting myself take comfort in her presence even though I couldn't share the truth. Not yet. Not until this was over. Brandon's business partner Tyler Chin arrived with his wife, followed by several people Brandon introduced as clients or professional contacts. I made mental notes of everyone he greeted with particular warmth, anyone who might be part of his network. Detective Simmons appeared an hour into the party, dressed casually and blending perfectly with the crowd. She'd told me she'd be there, but seeing her made the situation feel suddenly more real. The evening progressed with toasts and speeches. Grace gave a heartfelt tribute to our friendship and her happiness for my future. Brandon's colleague Nicole spoke about his business success and generous spirit. Tyler raised his glass to partnership and prosperity. Each kind word felt like evidence in reverse, documenting the elaborate fiction that surrounded us. Brandon pulled me aside during a lull in the festivities, leading me to a quieter section of the venue overlooking the water. The sun had fully set, and Portland's lights reflected off the river's surface. In another life, this would have been perfect. Romantic and memorable for all the right reasons. I want you to know how much this means to me. Brandon's voice was soft, intimate. Building a life with you, having all these people here celebrating us. Sometimes I can't believe how lucky I got that night in Seattle. The mention of Seattle sent ice through my veins. That conference where we'd met, where he'd selected me from a crowd of potential targets. I managed to smile. I'm the lucky one. He kissed me, and I kissed him back, performing for anyone who might be watching. When we returned to the party, I noticed Detective Simmons speaking with Tyler Chin, her cover story apparently positioning her as someone's +1 from work. She caught my eye briefly, a small nod indicating she was monitoring everything. The party continued for another hour, guests mingling and celebrating our upcoming marriage. I accepted congratulations, posed for photos, and played my role perfectly. But I was also watching. Observing Brandon's interactions, noting when he stepped away to take phone calls, tracking his movements through the venue. Around 9, I noticed him in an intense conversation with someone I didn't recognize. A silver-haired man in his 50s, well-dressed but with an air that suggested he wasn't part of our regular social circle. They stood apart from the main gathering, speaking in low voices. Brandon's body language was different, more guarded, less performative than when he interacted with other guests. I drifted closer, pretending to check on catering details while positioning myself where I might overhear their conversation. The ambient noise from the party made it difficult, but I caught fragments. The man was saying something about timelines and risk assessment. Brandon responded with words I couldn't make out clearly, but his tone carried an edge I'd never heard before. Sharp, almost cold. Then I heard him say clearly, 3 weeks. Everything proceeds as planned. The silver-haired man glanced around, his gaze passing over me without recognition. I turned away quickly, busying myself with my phone as if checking messages. When I looked back, the man was walking toward the parking area, and Brandon was returning to the party, his warm smile back in place. I found Detective Simmons near the dessert table. The man who just left, silver hair, dark suit. Did you see him? She nodded subtly. Already got photos. We'll identify him. Did they say anything useful? Brandon said 3 weeks, everything proceeds as planned. Her expression tightened almost imperceptibly. That's our timeline then. He's committed to seeing this through. Which means we need to move faster than I'd hoped. What does that mean? It means we need to catch him doing something actionable before the wedding. We can't let him get you to that altar. The morning after the engagement party, I woke to find Brandon already dressed for the day, packing a small overnight bag. He noticed me stirring and smiled, crossing to sit on the edge of the bed. His hand brushed hair from my forehead in a gesture that once would have felt tender but now felt calculated. I have to run down to Eugene for a client meeting. Should be back tomorrow afternoon at the latest. He leaned down to kiss me, and I forced myself not to pull away. I'm sorry to leave you with all the last-minute wedding prep, but this client is important. No problem. My voice sounded sleep-rough, which helped hide any tension. What kind of meeting? Just reviewing some portfolio adjustments. Quarterly rebalancing stuff, pretty routine. His answer came smoothly, practiced. Tyler will handle anything urgent at the office. After he left, I waited exactly 15 minutes before calling Detective Simmons. She answered immediately, background noise suggesting she was already in motion. We identified your silver-haired friend from last night. Jonathan Pierce, though he's also used the names James Patterson and John Phillips. He's been connected to at least 3 other identity fraud operations. So he's definitely part of Brandon's network? Without question. And here's what's interesting. Pierce was spotted in Eugene 2 days ago meeting with someone at a commercial print shop that specializes in security documents. We think they're preparing new identification for Thompson's next identity. Brandon just told me he's going to Eugene for a client meeting. He left about 20 minutes ago. There was a pause, and I could hear Detective Simmons speaking to someone else in muffled tones. Then she was back, her voice crisp with decision. Natalie, we need to move now. If he's meeting Pierce and Eugene, they might be finalizing his exit strategy. We can't risk letting him get those documents. What do you need me to do? Stay exactly where you are and act normally if he contacts you. We're going to execute a warrant on his office and your apartment. I need your permission to enter, and I need you to document anything suspicious you've noticed in the apartment over the past few days. My apartment. The place I'd thought of as home for the past year. The idea of police searching through our things, documenting evidence of Brandon's deception in the space where I believed I was building a future, felt violating even though I knew it was necessary. You have my permission. What should I be looking for? Any documents that seem out of place. Passports, identification, anything with different names or photos. Financial records that don't match what he's told you about his business. Hidden storage areas you might not have noticed before. After we ended the call, I began a systematic search of the loft. I started with obvious places. His desk drawers, his closet, the storage area in our bedroom. Everything appeared normal, the expected accumulation of someone's daily life. Clothes, toiletries, business documents that looked legitimate. But Detective Simmons had said he was sophisticated, practiced at maintaining his covers. I thought about the things that had seemed slightly off over the past months. The way Brandon always handled the mail before I saw it. How he'd insisted on getting a safe installed in the closet for important documents, saying it was for security but never giving me the combination despite my asking several times. The locked filing cabinet in his home office that he claimed contained sensitive client information. The safe was mounted in the back of our walk-in closet, hidden behind hanging clothes. I'd seen him open it a few times, always when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The combination was 6 digits, and I'd never managed to catch the full sequence. But I remembered him mentioning once that he used meaningful numbers for passwords and codes. Birthdays, anniversaries, important dates. I tried his supposed birthday. Nothing. Our anniversary. Nothing. Then I remembered something he'd said early in our relationship, talking about his parents' death. The accident had happened on March 15th, he'd claimed. A date that had stuck with him, changed his life. I tried 031585, assuming a birth year in the mid-80s based on his apparent age. The safe clicked open. Inside, I found a fireproof document box. My hands trembled as I pulled it out, setting it on the closet floor. The contents made my vision blur. 3 passports, each with Brandon's photo but different names. Derek Thompson. Marcus Webb. Brandon Colton. Each showed different birth dates, different birthplaces, all meticulously crafted to look authentic. Beneath the passports, I found a USB drive and several folders containing what appeared to be identity documents. Social security cards, driver's licenses, birth certificates. Each set corresponded to one of the names in the passports. There were also bank statements for accounts I'd never heard of, showing balances in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. My phone buzzed. Detective Simmons with an update. Officers are 10 minutes from your location. Did you find anything? I told her about the safe, my voice shaking. She instructed me to photograph everything before the police arrived, to document it exactly as I'd found it. I used my phone to capture images of each document, the bile rising in my throat as I processed what I was seeing. This wasn't just fraud. This was a complete infrastructure for creating and discarding identities. One folder contained information that made my blood run cold. It held detailed notes about me. My bank account numbers, my social security number, my credit card information. Everything was documented with precision, including passwords I'd never shared with him. He'd been harvesting my personal information systematically, probably planning to open accounts in my name or drain my resources after the wedding. There were also notes about my family. My brother Marcus's business, my parents' retirement accounts, even Grace's design company. He hadn't just been targeting me. He'd been mapping my entire network, identifying every potential resource he could exploit. The doorbell rang, startling me from my horrified cataloging. I opened the door to find Detective Simmons with 2 uniformed officers and someone she introduced as Agent Christopher Lane from the FBI. Apparently, Brandon's operation had crossed enough state lines to warrant federal involvement. Ms. Harper, I know this is overwhelming. Agent Lane's voice was kind but professional. We're going to process this scene carefully. I need you to show us exactly what you found and walk us through anything else that seemed unusual. I led them to the closet, showing them the safe and its contents. Agent Lane photographed everything methodically while Detective Simmons asked questions about Brandon's routines, his habits, anything that might give them insight into his current location or plans. The locked filing cabinet in his office proved equally damning. The officers had tools to open it without Brandon's key, revealing more financial documents and what appeared to be correspondence with various accomplices. Email printouts discussed logistics, timing, and targets using coded language that was nevertheless transparent in context. One email chain caught Agent Lane's attention. It referenced something called the Sentinel acquisition with a completion date listed as October 15th. My wedding date. the Sentinel Hotel where we'd planned to marry. The terminology was clinical, reducing what should have been a romantic celebration to a business transaction. He was calling our wedding an acquisition. I said it aloud, the words tasting like ash. Like I was a company to be purchased. That's exactly how he sees it. Detective Simmons placed a hand on my shoulder. You're not a person to him. You're a resource to be exploited and discarded. While they processed the apartment, my phone rang. Brandon's name on the screen. Everyone in the room went silent, and Agent Lane nodded for me to answer. They had equipment ready to record the call. I took a steadying breath and answered with forced cheerfulness. Hey, how's Eugene? Brandon's voice came through warm and relaxed. Good, just finished the morning session. I was thinking about you and wanted to hear your voice. How's your day going? Fine. Working on some final details with Vanessa. The flower arrangements, making sure the timeline is confirmed. My voice sounded almost normal to my own ears, though my free hand was clenched so tightly my nails bit into my palm. Perfect. Listen, I've been thinking about our honeymoon. What if we extended it an extra week? Maybe add a few days in the Maldives? That sounds amazing. We'd have to check with work, but I can request the extra time. Don't worry about work. This is our once-in-a-lifetime trip. We should make it memorable. There was something in his tone, an emphasis that felt loaded with meaning I didn't want to interpret. We talked for a few more minutes about meaningless details before he said he needed to get back to his meetings. After I ended the call, Agent Lane played back the recording, analyzing Brandon's words. The honeymoon extension. The suggestion not to worry about work. It all pointed to someone planning a prolonged absence, positioning it in a way that wouldn't raise immediate alarms when I didn't return. He's planning to keep you out of the country for as long as possible while he drains your accounts and establishes his next identity. Agent Lane's assessment was clinical but damning. The extended honeymoon gives him time and distance. By the time you realize what's happening, he'll be untraceable. But you're going to stop him before that. I made it a statement rather than a question, needing the reassurance. We're going to try. Detective Simmons exchanged a glance with Agent Lane. But we need to catch him with Pierce and Eugene, making the transaction for those new documents. That's our clearest path to charges that will stick. What if he doesn't meet with Pierce? What if he senses something is wrong? Then we have what we found here as evidence, but a good defense attorney could argue someone planted it. We need to catch him in the act of committing a crime. Agent Lane began packing up the photographed documents. Which means we need you to keep playing your role. For how much longer? Through the weekend. We have surveillance on Pierce and Eugene. The moment Thompson makes contact, we'll move in. But until then, he can't suspect you know anything. The officers left after securing the apartment, taking the contents of the safe with them as evidence but leaving everything else undisturbed so Brandon wouldn't notice changes. I was alone in the loft again, surrounded by the carefully constructed life of a person who didn't exist, waiting for my fake fiancé to return so I could continue pretending I believed his lies. I called Grace, needing to hear a friendly voice even though I couldn't tell her what was happening. She answered cheerfully, asking about wedding preparations and whether I'd made a final decision on the cake flavors. Her normalcy, her assumption that everything was proceeding as planned, felt both comforting and alienating. That evening, I sat in the loft with my laptop, researching everything I could find about long-term romance scams and their psychological impact on victims. Article after article described the manipulation tactics, the systematic isolation, the way these criminals study their targets to become exactly what they need. I saw my relationship with Brandon mapped out in clinical terms, each romantic gesture reframed as calculated manipulation. One article discussed something called cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort of holding contradictory beliefs. The researcher explained that scam victims often struggle to reconcile the person they loved with the criminal who exploited them. The two versions feel incompatible, leading to confusion about what was real and what was performance. I understood that struggle intimately. Part of me still wanted to believe that some of it had been real. The quiet mornings when Brandon made coffee exactly how I liked it. The way he'd hold me during thunderstorms because he knew I found them unsettling. The time he'd driven 3 hours to surprise me when I was stuck working late on a difficult campaign. Had all of that been calculated? Or had there been moments of genuine connection within the larger deception? My phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. Just a photo of the Eugene cityscape with a message saying he was thinking of me. I stared at it, analyzing every pixel for hidden meaning, wondering if he was actually in Eugene or somewhere else entirely. Wondering if the photo was even current or pulled from some archive of images he used for situations like this. Detective Simmons had given me a secure messaging app to communicate updates without risk of Brandon accessing my regular texts. I sent her the photo, asking if it matched their surveillance of Eugene. Her response came quickly. Photo is stock image from 2 years ago. He's not where he says he is. The deception was so casual, so effortless. He'd sent me a fake photo without hesitation, maintaining his fiction even when he thought there was no reason to. It made me wonder how many other small lies I'd missed, how many times he'd manipulated reality while I'd trusted implicitly. Brandon returned the following evening, arriving with flowers and an elaborate story about his successful Eugene meetings. He kissed me at the door, handed me the bouquet, and launched into detailed accounts of portfolio strategies and client conversations that I now knew were complete fiction. I smiled, thanked him for the flowers, and felt nothing but cold calculation as I played my part. Over dinner, he brought up the honeymoon extension again, showing me resort photos on his phone. The Maldives looked stunning in the images, pristine beaches and overwater bungalows that would have thrilled me a week ago. Now I saw them as the backdrop for my planned disappearance, the place where I'd be isolated while he systematically destroyed my financial life. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Detective Simmons on the secure app. Pierce spotted entering a document facility in Eugene. Thompson's vehicle just pulled into the same location. Moving now. I forced myself to focus on Brandon's words about snorkeling and spa treatments, nodding at appropriate moments while my pulse hammered. Somewhere 30 minutes south, law enforcement was closing in on the man sitting across from me, catching him in the act of obtaining fraudulent documents. The performance I'd been maintaining for days was almost over. Brandon's phone rang, interrupting his honeymoon planning. He glanced at the screen, and I saw something flicker across his face. Not quite fear, but heightened alertness. He excused himself, taking the call in the bedroom. Through the partially closed door, I heard his voice change, losing its warm casual tone for something sharper. I moved closer, straining to hear. He was speaking in clipped sentences, asking questions about exposure and timelines. Then silence as he listened. When he spoke again, his voice carried an edge of cold fury I'd never heard before. How compromised are we talking? My phone buzzed again. Pierce in custody. Thompson fled the scene. We lost him in traffic but have all the documents he was purchasing. Officers en route to your location. Lock yourself in a room now. My blood turned to ice. Brandon was here. In the apartment. And he knew something had gone wrong. I heard his footsteps approaching and grabbed a kitchen knife, backing toward the door. Brandon emerged from the bedroom, his expression completely transformed. Gone was the warm smile, the caring fiancé. What looked back at me was cold assessment, calculating risk and options. How long have you known? His voice was flat, emotionless. Long enough. I kept the knife visible, my hand surprisingly steady. The police are on their way. It's over, Derek. Or is it Marcus? I can't keep track of which lie you're living today. Something almost like respect crossed his features. You're smarter than I gave you credit for. Most of them never figure it out until I'm gone. He moved slowly into the kitchen, maintaining distance but positioning himself between me and the door. That surveillance system I thought I was so careful about, you found the monitoring, didn't you? I found everything. The passports, the documents, the notes about my family. All of it. He laughed, a sound without humor. I really did choose well with you. In another life, we could have been good partners. You've got the strategic mind for it. I'm nothing like you. No, you're better. He leaned against the counter, seeming oddly relaxed despite the situation. You played me for days, kept your composure, gathered evidence. I was so focused on the acquisition I missed all the signs. Sirens became audible in the distance, growing closer. Brandon heard them too, his head tilting slightly to track the sound. He looked back at me, and for a moment, I saw something almost human in his expression. Regret, perhaps. Or simply disappointment that a good plan had failed. For what it's worth, he said, his voice softer, some of it was real. Not the name, not the history, but the time we spent together. You were never just a mark. Yes, I was. I held his gaze, refusing to let him rewrite the narrative. That's all any of us were to you. Resources to exploit. The sirens were right outside now. Brandon moved toward the window, looking down at the police vehicles arriving below. When he turned back, his expression had shifted again, becoming the charming man I'd thought I loved. One last performance for old time's sake. Tell them I was good to you. That you believed it completely. It'll make the story better. Then he was gone, disappearing through the bedroom toward the fire escape. I heard Detective Simmons shouting in the hallway, officers pounding on the door. I unlocked it with shaking hands, and they flooded in, searching the apartment. But Brandon had vanished into the Portland night, leaving behind nothing but evidence of his elaborate deception. Detective Simmons found me in the kitchen still holding the knife, my composure finally cracking. He's gone. My voice sounded hollow. He just walked away. We'll find him. She took the knife gently from my hand. And you're safe. That's what matters. 8 months later, I stood in a federal courtroom watching Brandon Colton, whose real name was apparently Daniel Reeves, sentenced to 15 years for identity fraud, theft, and conspiracy. They'd caught him in Sacramento trying to establish yet another new identity. The documents from Eugene, combined with what I'd found in the apartment and testimony from multiple victims, had built an unshakable case. I'd started a consulting firm helping people protect themselves from romance scams, working with victims to rebuild their lives. Grace had become my business partner, and together we'd created resources for recognizing manipulation patterns. My brother Marcus had helped develop security protocols that made it harder for people like Brandon to harvest personal information. The man who'd called himself my fiancé looked at me across the courtroom as they led him away. No warmth, no pretense. Just acknowledgement between two people who'd played a game where only one could win. I'd lost 2 years and nearly lost everything else. But I'd won my freedom. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.